The Galactic Confederation had enjoyed 3,000 years of peace, prosperity, and polite conversation. Their diplomats were legendary, their philosophers unparalleled, and their bureaucracy so efficient it made watching paint dry seem like an extreme sport. They were, to put it bluntly, absolutely screwed when the Scourge arrived. Admiral Krillex stood before the Galactic Council, his 12 appendages trembling. Not from fear, not entirely from fear, but from the 18 stimulant patches attached to his exoskeleton. When you've been awake for 7 standard cycles coordinating a failing defense of the outer systems, you tend to lean heavily on pharmaceuticals. Esteemed council members, Krillex wheezed, I regret to inform you that we have lost the Praxis sector. The Scourge fleet has adapted to our defense algorithms. Again. High Chancellor Zoltria's skin rippled with displeasure, a sight that reminded Krillex uncomfortably of his lunch trying to escape his third stomach. Admiral, we've lost 63% of our combat vessels and 8 colony worlds in just 2 cycles. How is this possible? Our civilization has the most advanced technology in known space. With respect, Chancellor, Krillex replied, technology isn't the issue. The Scourge adapts to our combat patterns because they are predictable. Our military academies teach logical, efficient battle strategies. The Scourge simply calculates our next move and counters it. The council member Blurn, an ancient blob of sentient protoplasm, burbled thoughtfully. What we need is something unpredictable, something that defies logic and reason, something irrational, Krillex finished. The council chamber fell silent, which was saying something for a group that included 6 members who communicated exclusively through telepathy. Junior Archivist Nexel, who nobody had invited but who had somehow appeared anyway, bureaucracy has its advantages, nervously cleared one of his throats. There is one species. System 56297b, the local designation, Earth. The holographic display activated, showing a blue-green planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. This species was classified Do Not Contact by the Exploration Division 300 years ago, Nexel continued. They're primitive, only achieved spaceflight recently, and they're, he paused, searching for a diplomatic term, extremely violent. The display showed humans engaging in various activities, sports where they deliberately collided with each other, entertainment featuring elaborate simulations of combat, and vehicles racing at unsafe speeds for no apparent reason. They call themselves humans, Nexel added, and they spend an alarming percentage of their resources developing new ways to kill each other. Krillex's antennae perked up. They're perfect. High Chancellor Zoltria's color changed to alarmed mauve. You can't be serious. These creatures are monsters. Exactly, said Krillex, a manic gleam in his compound eyes. And when the universe needs monsters to fight their wars, where else should we turn? Ambassador Plink considered herself a master of interspecies diplomacy. In her 400-year career, she had negotiated peace with the silicon-based crystallids, who considered most carbon life forms to be disgusting bags of mostly water. Established trade relations with the methane-breathing Jovoids, despite an unfortunate incident involving a spark and 16 exploding diplomats. And even managed to translate the quantum oscillator's temporal language, despite the fact that they answered questions 3 days before you asked them. None of that prepared her for humans. The Confederation's first contact ship, elegantly named Harmonious Dialogue through mutual understanding and respect, landed in what the Earth Information Networks identified as a neutral location called Nebraska. Remember, Plink briefed her team, these humans are primitive but dangerous. We approach with caution, dignity, and... The ship's sensors blared as something small and fast approached their landing site. A battered ground vehicle skidded to a halt in a cloud of dust just meters from their ship. A human emerged, slammed the vehicle's door, and approached with a swagger that Plink's cultural database couldn't begin to interpret. Yo, I'm Captain Jack Monroe, but everyone calls me Havoc. Guess which nickname I earned the hard way? The human grinned, revealing alarmingly white teeth. He wore faded blue leg coverings, a black upper garment with the phrase "I'm not arguing. I'm just explaining why I'm right," face and facial hair that seemed deliberately styled to look unkempt. Plink's translator choked on the informal language, producing a series of confused beeps before settling on, "Greetings, potentially aggressive primate. This one is designated Communication Specialist 3rd rank Plink of the Galactic Confederation." "Cool, cool. So, space aliens, huh? Neat. Your government guys told me you need some help with, and I quote, an extinction-level threat to all sentient life as we know it. Sounds like Tuesday." Monroe pulled out a small device and began manipulating it. "Are you documenting this historic meeting?" Plink asked, gesturing to the device. "Nah, ordering tacos. You guys hungry? Earth's first alien visitors should try a burrito supreme." 3 hours later, after what Monroe called the best Dan welcome party in interstellar history, which involved 6 other humans arriving, consuming vast quantities of spiced food items, and asking increasingly personal questions about alien anatomy, Plink managed to steer the conversation toward the actual crisis. "So let me get this straight," said Lieutenant Danny Boom Boom Rodriguez, wiping hot sauce from her chin. "You guys have been exploring space for thousands of years, have technology that makes our best stuff look like stone tools, and you're getting your butts kicked by some hostile aliens?" "The Scourge are highly adaptive," Plink explained. "They analyze patterns and..." Yeah, they figure out your moves. A classic. So you need people who fight dirty." This came from technical specialist Owen Glitch Miller, who had spent the entire meeting attempting to disassemble a small Confederation communication device with a tool he called a Swiss Army knife. Commander Brock Tank Thompson, a human of alarming proportions, laughed so loudly that Plink's translator temporarily shut down to protect her auditory sensors. "Well, you've come to the right planet, little purple dude. I am female, and my epidermis is more mauve than purple," Plink corrected automatically. Monroe leaned forward. "Look, Ambassador Plink, was it? My team and I specialize in unconventional warfare. We're the ones they call when playing by the rulebook gets people killed. From what you're saying, your fancy space military has a rulebook problem. We have 14,622 volumes of tactical regulations," Plink acknowledged. Monroe exchanged glances with his team. "Yeah, that tracks. All right, here's the deal. We'll help you fight your war, but we do it our way. No committees. No 14,000-volume rulebooks. That is concerning," Plink admitted. "It should be," grinned Monroe. "Now, when do we get to see your spaceship's weapons systems?" Plink's color shifted to alarmed chartreuse. "Why would you need to see those?" "A professional curiosity," Monroe replied with a smile that made Plink deeply regret this entire mission. The Confederation's premier military training facility orbited the gas giant Vorex IV. Over 10,000 years, it had produced the galaxy's finest strategic minds, diplomatic security forces, and ceremonial honor guards with impeccable posture. It had never seen anything like the humans. "Oba. Igia." Fleet Commander Driggs watched in horror as Captain Monroe deliberately crashed a training simulator. Again. "Why does he keep doing that?" Driggs asked Ambassador Plink. "He says he's testing the limits of the system," Plink replied, her color cycling through shades of distress. "By destroying expensive equipment?" "Apparently, humans call it thinking outside the box. The box being, in this case, operational parameters and common sense." Across the training deck, Lieutenant Rodriguez was demonstrating hand-to-hand combat techniques to a group of horrified Confederation security officers. The techniques seemed to involve an alarming number of vulnerable body parts and what Rodriguez kept calling fighting dirty. "But why would you strike an opponent in their reproductive organs?" asked a confused officer. "That's not where vital systems are located in most species." "Because it hurts like hell and ends fights quick," Rodriguez explained. "Look, in real combat, nobody gets points for being honorable. You hit fast, hit hard, and aim where it hurts most." Meanwhile, technical specialist Miller had somehow bypassed the security protocols on the station's environmental systems. "Just showing you where your vulnerabilities are," he explained to the furious station security chief. "If I can crack your system in 2 hours, imagine what your enemies could do." Our systems comply with all Confederation security protocols. The chief protested. Yeah, and those protocols were written by people who think logically. Bad guys don't. Commander Thompson had gathered a crowd as he demonstrated human endurance by performing what he called push-ups for the past hour. 498, 499, 500, he grunted, finally standing up. That's just the warm-up, folks. The medical officer monitoring him was frantically checking readings. Your lactic acid levels should have incapacitated you long ago. And your pain threshold, we registered enough discomfort to immobilize most sentient species. Thompson laughed. That's just Tuesday at the gym, Doc. Humans are built to push through pain. Later that cycle, Admiral Krillex observed a tactical exercise where the humans were pitted against the station's elite training squadron. This will be enlightening, he told Plink. Our elite squadron has never lost a simulated engagement. 90 seconds later, the simulation ended with the entire elite squadron destroyed and Monroe's team emerging without a scratch. How? Demanded the elite squadron commander. You violated every tactical principle in the manual. Exactly, Monroe grinned. You expected us to follow rules. Real enemies don't. As the humans continued their chaotic approach to training, Krillex turned to Plink. They're undisciplined, unpredictable, and completely disregard protocols, he observed. Yes, Plink agreed miserably. They're perfect, Krillex concluded. Schedule them for deployment immediately. But they've only completed 3 days of the standard 6-month training program. Precisely why they might actually survive, Krillex replied. The Scourge have already calculated responses to all our standard training. These humans haven't learned enough to be predictable. Across the room, Monroe was teaching a group of Confederation officers something called trash talk. It's psychological warfare, he explained. You get in your enemy's head before you even start fighting. But why tell your opponent that their maternal figure engaged in inappropriate activities with various species? Asked a confused officer. Because it makes them angry, and angry people make mistakes, Monroe said with a grin that made several nearby officers involuntarily step back. These humans, Krillex mused, they're not just warriors, they're something we haven't been for millennia. What's that? Plink asked. Monsters, Krillex replied. Magnificent monsters. The contested outpost on Rigel 9 had changed hands 6 times in the past cycle. Each time, the Confederation forces had established defensive positions according to textbook procedures. Each time, the Scourge had calculated the optimal counterattack and overwhelmed them. This time would be different, if only because Captain Monroe had used the tactical planning session to draw what he called a smiley face on the holographic display, causing 3 Confederation strategists to require medical attention. This is your grand strategy, demanded Colonel Zivek, the Confederation officer technically in command of the mission. A crude facial representation? Nope, Monroe replied cheerfully. That was just to mess with you. The real plan is here. He produced a crumpled piece of actual paper, a material so obsolete that Zivek had only seen it in historical archives. You wrote your battle plans on dead plant matter? Zivek was aghast. With no encryption, no backup? Oh, can't hack paper, Miller pointed out. Old school has advantages. The plan, as it turned out, was deceptively simple. So simple that Zivek kept insisting they must be missing something. We're going to let them think they've won, Monroe explained for the 5th time. Then, when they've lowered their guard, we hit them from angles they won't expect. But our tactical simulations indicate. Your tactical simulations are why you keep losing, Rodriguez interrupted. The enemy has your playbook memorized. Time to throw the playbook out the airlock. When the Confederation dropship approached Rigel 9, they broadcast the standard approach codes and followed the standard landing procedure. Everything seemed textbook, which was precisely the problem. Commander Vrex of the Scourge fleet watched with smug satisfaction as his sensors detected the approaching Confederation vessel. Predictable as always, he hissed to his bridge crew. They never learn. Prepare the standard counterattack. They'll establish a perimeter at these coordinates, set up their shield generators here and here, and we'll overwhelm them from these three vectors. What Commander Vrex didn't expect was for the Confederation dropship to suddenly accelerate to dangerous speeds, perform a maneuver that violated several laws of sensible piloting, and crash directly into the outpost's landing bay. Did they just deliberately crash their ship? Vrex asked incredulously. Before his crew could respond, alarms blared throughout the Scourge vessel. Sir, the Confederation troops are not establishing defensive positions. They're everywhere. They're attacking in patterns that make no tactical sense. Inside the outpost, Monroe led his team through corridors in a seemingly random pattern that had Colonel Zivek on the verge of a nervous breakdown. You're bypassing defensible positions. Bet you're ignoring strategic choke points. This isn't how warfare works. Maybe not in your textbooks, Monroe replied, checking a hand-drawn map. But I guarantee the enemy's textbooks don't cover this either. In sight, Commander Thompson had somehow gotten separated from the main group deliberately, it turned out, and was causing havoc in the outpost's power distribution center. Sir, reported a frantic Scourge officer to Commander Vrex, one of the aliens is systematically destroying power nodes in a pattern that makes no sense. Our predictive algorithms can't determine his next target. That's because I'm choosing them by thinking about my favorite pizza toppings, Thompson later explained to an astounded Colonel Zivek. Pepperoni was the main reactor, mushrooms were the backup generators, and extra cheese was their command center. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Rodriguez had led a small team into the Scourge commander's personal quarters, not to capture him but to, as she put it, redecorate. When Commander Vrex returned to find his precious collection of conquered worlds' artifacts rearranged into what humans apparently called a rude gesture, his rage was heard throughout the outpost. Technical specialist Miller had perhaps the most impact, hacking into the Scourge communication systems, not to disable them, but to broadcast what he called the most annoying songs in human history on all frequencies. The psychological effect of something called Baby Shark on the Scourge forces could not be overstated. By the time Commander Vrex realized what was happening, Monroe's team had systematically thrown the entire outpost into chaos, not by superior firepower but by sheer unpredictability. They're not fighting according to any known doctrine, Vrex snarled. They're just making it up as they go along. That's our specialty, Monroe later told Admiral Krillex during the debriefing. You guys have been fighting wars of logic and prediction. Us humans specialize in chaos and improvisation. The Scourge had retreated from Rigel 9, not because they were militarily defeated, but because, as one captured officer put it, fighting these new aliens is like trying to predict the behavior of a brain-damaged Vorelian swamp beast. It's not just difficult, it's pointless. Admiral Krillex's antennae twitched with what might have been amusement. I'm beginning to understand why your species spent so much time fighting amongst yourselves. You're actually enjoying this, aren't you? Let's just say, Monroe replied with a grin, that we've found our niche in the galaxy. The Confederation High Command Chamber had never been so tense. Even the telepathic council members were giving each other headaches. You want to do what? High Chancellor Zoltria's skin had turned a shade of purple previously unseen in the known galaxy. Captain Monroe, standing before the assembled leadership of the Galactic Confederation, repeated himself with the patience of someone explaining rocket science to a particularly stubborn rock. We want to let the Scourge capture me and my team. Deliberately, added Rodriguez. On purpose, clarified Thompson. As part of the plan, Miller concluded helpfully. Admiral Krillex, who had developed an eye twitch since working with the humans, sighed. Perhaps you could explain the strategic advantage of surrendering your most effective combat unit to the enemy. Trojan horse, said Monroe, as if that explained everything. It did not, as the blank stares around the room confirmed. Ancient Earth history, Monroe elaborated. The city of Troy couldn't be conquered, so the Greeks built a giant wooden horse, hid soldiers inside, and gave it to the Trojans as a gift. Trojans brought it inside their walls. Night falls. Greeks come out, open the gates, Troy falls. Boom. Bone. You're suggesting we build a large equine replica and present it to the Scourge? Asked a confused council member. It's a metaphor, Monroe explained. We let the Scourge capture us, they bring us to their main fleet, thinking they've got prize prisoners, and then we wreak havoc from the inside. That's insanely dangerous, said Krillex. Exactly why it'll work, Rodriguez countered. The Scourge has calculated every possible conventional attack you might make. What they haven't calculated is that anyone would be crazy enough to get captured on purpose. Because it's suicidal, exclaimed Zoltria. Only if you think like a logical being, Monroe replied with a grin that made several council members instinctively check their personal security devices. Fortunately, we're humans. After hours of debate, during which Monroe's team demonstrated an alarming capacity to consume caffeinated beverages and remain utterly unmoved by rational arguments, Admiral Krillex finally gave his reluctant approval. But, he insisted, you will take Confederation communication devices, weapons and… Nope, interrupted Miller. They'll scan for that stuff. We go in clean. Then how will you possibly? The less you know, the more genuine your surprise will be, Monroe winked. Trust me, we've got this. The preparations that followed made absolutely no sense to the Confederation observers. Instead of military equipment, the humans requested 37 containers of something called super glue, 14 bars of scented cleaning products, soap, a supply of powdered capsaicin extract, several bottles of a human beverage called tequila, a musical recording device containing what Monroe described as the most annoying playlist in human history, and most puzzlingly, a large quantity of small metal objects that humans called Lego bricks. These are your weapons? Krillex asked incredulously. No, Monroe replied with a disturbing smile. These are much worse than weapons. The capture went exactly as planned, which was to say, chaotically but effectively. The human team allowed themselves to be taken aboard Commander Vrex's flagship after a staged malfunction of their shuttle in Scourge-controlled space. Commander Vrex personally oversaw their processing, taking particular pleasure in the capture of the troublesome humans who had cost him the Rigel 9 outpost. At last he hissed at Monroe, I have you exactly where analytical probability indicated you would eventually end up defeated and at my mercy. Monroe gave him a smile that, had Vrex been more familiar with human expressions, should have terrified him. Sure, buddy. Whatever helps you sleep at night. As the humans were led away to holding cells, Monroe looked back at Vrex and called, Hey, quick question, your species walks barefoot in your private quarters, right? Vrex didn't dignify this with a response, dismissing it as another example of bizarre human behavior. He would remember the question approximately 6 hours later, when he stepped on the first of many carefully placed Lego bricks in his personal quarters, an experience that human children had been enduring for generations, and which proved to be universally painful across species boundaries. The Scourge flagship systems began failing in ways that defied explanation. First, all internal communications began broadcasting what humans called elevator music, punctuated by something called dad jokes. Next, the environmental controls in the officer quarters adjusted to what Miller cheerfully described as Satan's armpit levels of heat and humidity. Most disruptive of all, small amounts of capsaicin extract found their way into the ship's ventilation system near the bridge, causing Commander Vrex and his senior officers to experience what humans poetically called feeling like your face is melting off. How? Demanded Vrex, eyes streaming as Monroe's team was brought to the bridge under heavy guard. How did you do this? You were confined in cells under surveillance. They? Yeah, about that, Monroe replied, seemingly unbothered by the armed guards. Humans have this thing called sleight of hand. It's basically lying, but with our fingers. Also, added Rodriguez, your guards really need to learn that accepting drinks from prisoners is a rookie mistake. The bridge screens suddenly flashed, showing the approaching Confederation fleet, a fleet that, according to all Scourge intelligence, should have been 3 systems away. Did I mention, Monroe said conversationally, that everything we told your interrogators about Confederation fleet movements was completely made up? Yeah, we've been feeding you bad intel since the moment we stepped on board. Commander Vrex's expression shifted from rage to something approaching respect. You plan to be captured. You wanted to be brought here. Give the alien a prize, Thompson rumbled. But why? Vrex demanded. Your actions have been chaotic, unpredictable. Exactly, Monroe interrupted. And while you've been trying to figure out our pattern which doesn't exist, by the way you've been broadcasting your fleet positions to the Confederation for the past 12 hours. Well, Miller held up a small device. Turns out your communication system has a tiny design flaw. If you reverse the polarity of the secondary encryption matrix while simultaneously you know what, never mind the technobabble. We punked you, dude. As the Confederation fleet engaged the surprised Scourge vessels, Monroe leaned closer to Commander Vrex. Here's the thing about humans that you analytical types never understand. We don't always need a logical reason to do things. Sometimes we do them just because they're awesome, or funny, or because someone told us we couldn't. You built your entire strategy around predicting rational behavior. But humans, well, were anything but rational. In the battle that followed, the Scourge fleet suffered its first major defeat, with their command structure in chaos thanks to the human sabotage, and their tactical algorithms rendered useless by the Confederation's apparently random attack patterns, directly inspired by what Monroe called action movie logic. The feared Scourge armada broke formation and retreated. 6 cycles later, the Galactic Confederation held a formal ceremony to honor the human team. Admiral Krillex, still twitching occasionally but now with significantly fewer stimulant patches, presented them with the Order of the Galactic Defender, the Confederation's highest military honor. Through your unique approach to warfare, Krillex announced to the assembled dignitaries, you have taught us a valuable lesson. Sometimes the most logical approach is to be deliberately illogical. We prefer the term creatively unpredictable, Monroe replied with a wink. In the aftermath of what Confederation historians would later call the human intervention, a curious change spread throughout Confederation space. Military academies began teaching courses with names like adaptive unpredictability and creative combat solutions. Younger officers were encouraged to question established tactical doctrine. The 14,000 volumes of military regulations were not exactly thrown out, but they were now prefaced with a new guiding principle. When all logical options fail, ask what a human would do. As for humanity, the Galactic Confederation quickly revised their status from do not contact to contact with extreme caution, preferably with backup. Ambassador Plink, who had somehow survived the entire ordeal without suffering a complete nervous breakdown, though her color-changing capabilities were permanently limited to shades of anxiety, became the Confederation's first permanent envoy to Earth. They're violent, unpredictable, and frequently make no sense, she reported to the High Council. But when the universe needed monsters to fight their wars, they were exactly what we needed. And now? Asked Chancellor Zoltria. Really, sir. Plink's color shifted to a thoughtful blue. Now I think the real challenge begins teaching them that being monsters isn't the only thing they're good for. Back on Earth, Captain Monroe and his team were already training the first official human contingent to the Confederation Defense Force. Their unofficial motto, emblazoned on their training facility, when the universe needs monsters, it calls Earth. The Commander Vrex, meanwhile, had developed a curious habit of checking his floor for small objects before walking barefoot anywhere. Some lessons, it seemed, transcended species boundaries.